All right, so today we are going to demonstrate making egg pasta for two. It's a 1 cup of flour to 2 eggs ratio, and it's a very quick recipe, but it's going to be an awesome opportunity for you guys. Okay, so when we measure the flour, we're going to measure it 2 ways today, but you can choose which way you want to measure it in your kitchen. So when we measure flour, we always have to fluff the flour first. Use a scoop. We're going to sprinkle 1 cup of flour like this. And then we're going to just gently tap and swipe. Now for today, we're going to double check our measurement. We are going to put it on the scale, which is set to ounces. And then you hit 0 or tear out the scale so it says 0. And we're going to double check our measurement. 1 cup of flour should weigh about 5 ounces. And we are right there. So I'm just going to add a little sprinkle more to get to that. Oops, now I have to take some back out to get to 5 ounces. With our flour, we're going to put it on a clean surface. I washed this countertop before we started, and we're going to put it on a clean countertop. We're going to make a well in the middle, like this, and then we are going to grab a fork. And we're going to make the well a little bit bigger because we have to hold our eggs. To that well, we are going to add 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Put that, kind of sprinkle that all over inside the well. And we need 1 egg and 1 egg yolk. With pasta, you actually want the fat that's in the egg yolk to make it rich. So what I recommend is you start with the egg yolk first. That way, if you have a mistake, you have a second try. So we're going to crack it on the side of the bowl. And you can use a egg separator if you want. But for this, I'm going to show you the other technique. We're just going to go back and forth, back and forth. And we're going to put that yolk right in the middle of that well. Set that to the side. And then for our next egg, we're going to actually put it in this bowl just so that if we have shell, we can pick it out before we add it to the flour. Put that in there. That back to the side. Make sure our well is big enough, and we're going to put that whole egg in there. There weren't any shells. And then we're just going to gently whisk, pulling in the flour from the outside. You can actually make this in like a stand mixer or a food processor, but there's something about doing it by hand that's really satisfying. And it's pretty cheap to not have that equipment. And then at some point, you just kind of have to go for it. You're going to pull the flour in, lightly flour your hands, and work it in. Now there'll be a point where you notice that the dough seems a little dry as you need, and when you do that, you're going to have a small dish of water sitting off to the side that you can add about a teaspoon at a time of water. So here's my dish of cold water ready to go. I'm just going to take a teaspoon. I'm going to sprinkle it kind of all over because it is a little bit of a dry dough. The recipe that's posted on my teacher page has this recipe, which is a smaller batch, and it's a generous portion for 2, but there is a full batch as well that uses 3 whole eggs that you can make at home for your family as well. So we have it starting to come together nicely, but I can tell that there's still a lot of extra flour. So I'm going to sprinkle right on top of my dough a little bit more, and then I'm going to turn this over and incorporate that a little bit over here. It's a really simple recipe. It's also really inexpensive, but it tastes way fancier. If we want, we can add a little more here to the tabletop. I've only added 3 teaspoons, which is the equivalent of 1 tablespoon so far. And it's starting to come together for us. It doesn't actually have to be perfectly uniform because when it rests, the moisture kind of sorts itself out. So we are going to sort of move into a kneading part of the recipe where we press, fold, roll, and try to work in those extra bits of flour as we go. And I can see that it's still a little dry. So I'm going to go for, now this is a 4th teaspoon to pick up that extra bit. And I know it doesn't look like much, but it makes a lot of dough and a lot of noodles. And then when it cooks, it expands ever so slightly to be even more. I definitely recommend as you begin to make pasta, make it by hand at first so you get a feel for what you want it to be. You understand like how much moisture you want in it. And you can see that it's actually getting kind of tough to roll because at this point the gluten in the flour is kind of charged up and it's resistant to being folded and basically told what to do anymore. So we're getting to this point where it's becoming pretty cohesive. We don't have a lot of bits left on the tabletop. Give it a few more kneads and then we're going to just let it rest. Now you can let it rest for about 30 minutes just at room temperature on your countertop under a damp tea towel or wrapped in plastic wrap. You can also let it rest well wrapped and wrap it really well in saran wrap for like 24 hours in the fridge. You will start to see a little bit of discoloration. It starts to get a little bit gray if you go much beyond 24 hours. It's not unsafe to eat, it just doesn't quite look the same. So I feel like that's pretty good. It doesn't really want to give a whole lot. It's pretty stiff, so it's not at a place where it's ready to be rolled. We're going to let it rest in plastic wrap, and then we will roll it out. So our dough is rested for about 30 minutes, wrapped in plastic wrap, and you should have a nice, notice that it looks a little bit more hydrated. There's fewer drier spots. So what you're going to do now is you're just going to kind of flatten it out like a pancake. You're going to divide it into 3 pieces. You could probably get away with doing 2, but in terms of being new at it, it's much, much easier to start with a smaller piece. And then you want to kind of touch it. This is a pretty nice dough, but if it's a little bit sticky, you're going to want to use a lot of flour. Regardless, you're going to want to use flour. So this is a shaker. I have nothing but all-purpose flour in it. You're going to flour it. Anytime it feels sticky, you're going to want to add flour. And even like as you cut the noodles, you want to add a lot of flour to minimize sticking. So you're going to flatten it till it's about, somewhere around 1/4 inch thick. And then our pasta maker has a dial. The most important thing that you have to remember is you cannot just turn the dial. You have to pull the dial out and turn it. And as you turn it in, the 2 bars here get closer together. So it actually starts on 0, and that's where you want it to be, like this. And then as you roll, you'll go all the way down to probably 7 or 8. We don't actually want to roll it all the way to 9 because it'll be too thin to manage. So somewhere between 7 and 8. But you have to pull the knob out before you turn, otherwise you actually strip the gears. So I've went ahead and flattened this. This handle right here has like a notch in it, so you have to line it up with the machine, put it in here, and then you're going to simply feed it through. Optimally, you would actually have it the width of your machine, but it doesn't have to be. A lot of times what I recommend doing is we kind of do a final knead. So I'm going to fold it one more time like this and then feed it through again. And if it looks good, you can keep going. I'm going to go ahead and do a 3rd time. So we're somewhere between 2 and 3 times that you will actually fold it and shape it. Like that. Perfect. So we are good to go. We're going to then pull that knob out, go down to 1, and then you crank it. Starting to feel a little sticky, so I'm going to add a little extra flour to it. Go down to 2. Go down to 3. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it this way because it's going to be closer to the width of the machine. And 4. Now you really start to see it stretch. Go down to 6. Get a lot longer. And as you roll, it almost starts to become a little bit see-through. So I'm going to do 7. It's not too sticky, so I think we're good. I'm going to go down to 7. You know, lay it in the machine. Roll it out. And starting to get that see-through quality to it a little bit, like so. If you're feeling really bold, you can try 8, but 7 is totally fine to stop there. If it's starting to feel a little bit hard to manage or sticky or anything like that. So I'm going to roll it out. It's starting to get almost a paper-like texture. You can roll this out by hand if you don't have a pasta maker at home. But you probably won't get it quite as thin. So this is where I really recommend flouring it, and then just lightly dust it, flour it again, and dust it. We're going to let it rest before we cut, and then we'll move on to our next piece. We're going to flatten it a little bit like that, sprinkle it with flour, sprinkle it with flour. Remember, because I always forget, to turn your knob back to 0 and start the whole process over again. So I'm going to go ahead and roll the rest out, but you guys can do that on your own.
You're good.
All right, so our noodles are all rolled out. We're going to quickly move the handle out. We're going to do the fettuccine noodles, the wide cut noodles, just because they're a little bit beginner friendly as opposed to the thin cut noodles. And I recommend if they're about this long, it should be fine to go ahead and roll it. But this longer one, I would consider cutting in half. And you'll just use your dough scraper to do that. Cut them in half like that. We'll use that one first. So I recommend you start with the one that you rolled first and then move towards the ones that you rolled out the least. A little bit of rest does good because it allows the surface of the pasta to dry out a little bit. So then you just carefully feed it through the machine. And you have your noodles. I definitely recommend making your cute little nest. So flour it and flour it really well so that it doesn't stick. If your dough is on the wet side, don't be afraid to add extra flour because they will stick. And then we just move through, roll out all of our dough. Add a little flour, and then lightly toss it. Sometimes students like to really work the dough in this stage. Please don't, because that makes it stick sometimes, especially if your dough is a little bit wet. You can actually freeze your dough like this and just put it on a cookie sheet in these little nests, and it would keep. And then once it's frozen, you can put it in a Ziploc bag, or you can put it right in the boiling water, which I will show you next. All right, we're ready to cook it. We have a nice rolling boil in here. We have the pot about 2/3 full. We're going to go ahead and add a tablespoon of salt. I measure that by the center of your hand is roughly a tablespoon. This doesn't need to be super precise measurement, but typically you want it to be pretty salty because that's going to add some flavor to the pasta. Don't want to add any oil, and you also don't want to cook it as long as you think. The old myth that you throw it at the wall and it sticks is not how an Italian would want their pasta. They want it al dente, which means like it has a bite to it. This pasta will cook so fast, probably about 2 minutes is all that it takes. So we're going to put it in the pot like this. Going to grab our spoon and just stir it to break it up. And it actually is done when it floats to the top, which it's starting to do, but we're just going to give it another minute to cook, and then we'll strain it. So it's ready. Whenever you pour pasta, you want to definitely keep your face away because the steam can burn you, even just coming up in the air. we're going to let it strain. And give it a little shake. If you want, you can lightly run some cold water on it, but for this, I would recommend going ahead and adding it right to your sauce if everybody agrees to eat it, or get it to the table and serve it, and then everyone can add the sauce on their own. But there's homemade pasta.